Welcome to the Imaginaries.
Hello and welcome back to the Imaginaries podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things imaginary in literature and pop culture and film and television, and we are back here today to finish our two-part series covering the best of 2017 in science fiction and fantasy. So my name is Ken, and I'm here with my fellow podcat Tony. Say hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
And we wanted to quickly, before getting this show underway, mark the passing of a real great. So we got the word just a couple days ago when this podcast goes live, or hopefully goes live, that Ursula K. Le Guin has passed away. And I don't know about y'all, but she meant a great deal to me as a reader of science fiction and fantasy, and as an author, and as a person of non-binary gender extraction. So she was very, very foundational, and we just wanted to dedicate this second half of our awards to her, and to basically note that many of, if not all of our awards that we are giving out in 2017, last episode and this episode, are given out in the spirit of Ursula K. Le Guin, who was so very foundational. So I don't know if you have any words about her, Tony, but
I have nothing that could add to those sentiments. You said many good things.
Many good things. And I highly recommend that you check out Naomi Novik's poem, which she wrote instead of writing a obituary for Ursula K. Le Guin, and that poem went live on the New York Times website, so you can find it there. It's beautiful. It made me cry. I highly recommend checking it out. And Naomi Novik, of course, is the author of Uprooted and several other texts that we talk about frequently on our podcast. So nice little convergence there. So, moving back to our awards, Tony, what is our first award to give out today?
So, on our last awards podcast, we were all about the books. This time, we're going to be all about the screen. So, we're going to take you through movies, we're going to take you through TV shows, and we're going to end up at the confluence, talking about book cover art, the best book cover art of the year. But to start us off, we're going to start with our favorite TV show of the year. The TV show that we felt was the strongest in whatever season or partial seasons, because there are a couple of shows that had like half of the season air in 2017, and then we'll have another half somewhere else. But what shows that aired in 2017 were the best that science fiction and fantasy had to offer?
Our first nominee for Best Science Fiction or Fantasy Television Show 2017 was Season 4 of BoJack Horseman, followed by
Season 2 of The Expanse, and
Season 1 of The Handmaid's Tale, and
Season 1 of Runaways,
followed by Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery,
and then part of Season 4 and part of Season 5 of Steven Universe.
Season 2 of Stranger Things was our last item on the list. So, Tony, you want to walk us through our top pick for Best Television Show?
Absolutely. So, this year, we decided to give our top award. I say that as though we've done this before. Our first year, we decided to give our top TV show of the year to a series that's now in its sophomore season, heading into its junior year. It improved a lot over a first season that was already very strong. It is The Expanse.
Woo! And why did we pick The Expanse instead of these other excellent options?
This was one of the hardest choices we made this year. Some of these first seasons of shows were super, super strong. The Handmaid's Tale not only ran away with a lot of the genre awards this year, but also had a fair showing in the highly respected awards too. It won things like Emmys and Golden Globes, so it was universally praised. We want to also recognize that universal praise. There were also shows that have continued to get stronger and stronger, like Steven Universe and BoJack Horseman, which are critically acclaimed, going into many more advanced seasons. But we thought that The Expanse was just at a point now where it's really found its feet. It's featuring really interesting characters, really interesting plots. Its aesthetics are on point. Other shows, including some of the other nominees on this list, seem to be taking visual clues, among other things, cinematography, plotting, etc., from The Expanse and The Expanse's success. It also helps that The Expanse is one of the only really high production space operas out there right now, and it shows, because things can look really pretty and have really shitty writing or casting or whatever. But The Expanse has really moved into a place where it balances everything really well. And it's one of the, really, frankly, the best examples that we've seen on television of how to do that kind of balanced science fiction in a nuanced and really fascinating way.
And it also seems to be the whole package, in that not just is the show excellent, the production and the behind-the-scenes things that go on around the show also seem to be excellent. James S.A. Corey, the two authors who make up James S.A. Corey, are very active on Twitter. They're active in advocacy and civil rights and representation, and so are the folks involved in other show-running aspects, casting, so on and so forth. So The Expanse is an excellent show in its own right, even if you cut away everything that was happening behind the scenes. But knowing what happens behind the scenes on The Expanse makes enjoying the show just that much better, because you don't have to feel that it's a guilty pleasure or a problematic fave. It's pretty much just a straight-up fave. So major kudos to The Expanse for sure.
Yeah, yay for The Expanse. We are excited for season 3. Hopefully it'll be somewhere on our list of nominees this year, or I guess next year.
I'm super excited because I hear that, and based on season 2, the pattern began where they're starting to pull in material from the novellas, which were digital-only releases, and they're starting to pull in material from further on in the books arc. And I actually am holding off reading the books because I enjoyed the show so much. I don't want to know what happens next. So I'm very interested to see the conversations that arise in the books versus adaptation sort of conversation thing. So, yeah, very, very excited for season 3. Tony, what would be another science fiction show from our list that you think can't pass by unremarked?
Well, one of the shows that I was kind of tacitly mentioning when I said not a full season, as well as one of the shows that I think is taking some of its cinematographic impulses. No, fuck. Okay, let me try that again. That's taking some of its cinematography, some of its visual influence from The Expanse is Star Trek Discovery. And we sort of always knew that this show was either going to be on this list or was going to be such a train wreck that it would be nowhere near this list. And I'm very excited to say that it is on this list, and it has earned its spot on this list. We will have to dive into all the things that have happened in Star Trek Discovery in a future podcast. When its first season is complete, you can expect to see that. But I will say at this point that I think it's certainly the most visually arresting Star Trek. I think it throws some really interesting wrenches into the Star Trek universe. I think that it is... The casting is fantastic. The acting is fantastic. Like, you will... well, I'm not saying you will be. I am compelled by every one of the major characters because the actors are just so phenomenal, and the writing is also, very much elevated. So this is definitely a different kind of Star Trek, but it was, I think, in my opinion, one of the strongest shows of the year.
That sounds good. I also wanted to make a quick shout out to the television show Runaways, which had its first season on Hulu this year. And Runaways is obviously catering to a somewhat younger crowd. Actually, several of the shows that made our list are. But Runaways is unusual in that it is part of the Marvel Universe, and it's the first Marvel Universe show that's aimed at young teen audiences. And it marks such a significant improvement upon several of the other Marvel shows, which I will not mention. And it's got a great young cast. There are definitely hiccups and there are definitely messy plotting things, as there are with all Marvel cinematic universe creations. But it's a lot of fun. It's a pretty solid adaptation of the original material, which I have also been reading. But it updates what needs to be updated, and it has a much finer social conscience than the original material did. So I'm very happy with Runaways. I highly recommend checking it out. It's very bingeable. It's a lot of fun. It is a little bit of brain candy, but it's also for the materials provided, and with the spirit of Marvel, it does great work. So I recommend Runaways. What else would you recommend to our listeners from the 2017 lineup?
Speaking of shows that are aimed for some younger viewers, but have devotees that are perhaps outside of that age range, we need to talk about Steven Universe, because it has, again, raised the bar on what it's already been doing so successfully, not only in terms of queer representation on television, but also in terms of relationships between girls and their mothers, between boys and their surrogate parents. There were a lot of thematic through lines on Steven Universe in the parts of Season 4 and Season 5 that aired in 2017. Those are just a couple of them. And again, notice that we're trying to be really spoiler-free in this award shows, because we want you to go out and enjoy these things that we're recommending if you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet. But Steven Universe is one of those shows that has had now many episodes, several years to mature, and it is really killing it right now. Doing new things, but at the same time, treading the ground that fans know and love, but also opening up more and more in terms of what's possible in children's television, what's possible in cartoons, what's possible on TV in general today. So definitely need to recognize that and what Steven Universe is doing.
Yes. I think also worth recognizing is another show which has been on the tips of many people's tongues this year, which is Stranger Things, which had its second season released this last year, and it was a very strong season. I was impressed because after the events of the first season wound to their close, I had no clue what you follow that up with, and the showrunners found a way to follow it up with something as undeniably messy as the first season, but also equally as satisfying as the first season. It did resolve a lot of the problems of the first season, and then it had its own problems that it added to the mix. So it's not like a perfect show, but I think the reasons why we love shows like Stranger Things is not just in spite of its imperfections, but maybe because of them, in part. So I really, really enjoyed, for example, there's one character which got short shrift in season 1, and again, spoiler-free review, but one character who got very short shrift in season 1, and I was really curious to see where that would go, because this character persists into season 2, and you would have thought that there was nowhere for that character to go, but the show found a way to make that character's arc and development in season 2 really exciting and imaginative and hilarious. And of course, there was the advent of Sean Astin as a character, as an actor playing a character in season 2, and had a very satisfying character arc as well.
It could have been stunt casting.
It could have been.
There's so much, and I think that, sorry, I don't want to...
No, go for it.
But I have strong feelings about Stranger Things as well, because, so much of what Stranger Things is, in terms of its adult cast at least, could have been just kind of phone it in stunt casting. I mean, Winona Ryder in the first season, and then Sean Astin and Winona Ryder again in the second season, they're the examples who come immediately to mind, but they fucking bring it. They are amazing. Stranger Things is another show that, is so reliant, and so rightfully reliant, upon the acting abilities of its stars, both the kids and the adults, and the writing that powers that acting. And it just really, really amazing.
Right. I will say that there was one significant stumble in that there was an episode where, a white character was allowed to have rage at her circumstances, and a woman of color was not, and was policed, and that raised some eyebrows on Twitter amongst authors that we follow, including Nnedi Okorafor and Kay Jemison. So it is worth noting that it's not a perfect show, but there were things that brought it back, I think, or at least made it worth continuing on and finishing. And so, yeah, I would definitely say that rates on our list of top mentions for the year. Were there any other shows that you thought we needed to talk about from 2017?
So speaking of those rising brows, I think some folks who are familiar or perhaps unfamiliar, and we'll do some quick Googling, will be a little bit surprised to see BoJack Horseman on this list, because it's not science fiction, it's not really fantasy, but because it's not really drama either, and it's not really comedy, it's funny, but it doesn't really belong anywhere. And that's both a strength in terms of what the show can do, but also a weakness when it comes to recognizing how fucking brilliant the show is. So, again, going into its fourth season, first season was a bit of an all-over-the-place kind of experience, but seasons 2, 3, and now 4 have been some of the most compelling seasons of television, ever, for me. I put it on this list because I don't think you can have talking animals or people with animal heads that display some animal characteristics coexisting with humans without kind of going into at least a bit of fantasticality. So I know it's a stretch. I know that some people aren't going to necessarily agree with it being on this list, but it gives me the opportunity to say BoJack Horseman is amazing, and if you haven't yet been able to experience it, to see, what it's doing out there, how it's subverting narrative, and again, what TV shows can do, because our favorites are, as in the last episode, all about breaking shit apart.
Right.
Check out BoJack Horseman.
Yes. Yes. And as you've already mentioned at length, the final show that we wanted to make sure we talked about as one of our, top listed shows for the year, The Handmaid's Tale really did an exceptional job. We talked a lot in the first half of this awards show about these texts which are appealing to both traditional lovers of genre fiction, science fiction and fantasy, and lovers of quote-unquote, I've got my pinky finger out when I say this, literary fiction. And The Handmaid's Tale television show did the same kind of work in that it really appealed to people who love dystopias and science fiction, the genre, science fiction, even the operatic, space opera kind. As we obviously are. And it also really appealed to people who normally don't watch science fiction television shows. Yes. And I think part of that is the aesthetic of the show, part of it is the writing of the show, part of it is the fact that Margaret Atwood is heavily involved in this show and this adaptation of her book. So I highly recommend checking it out, even if you don't traditionally enjoy space opera kind of television. It's got cross-genre appeal, and it's so brilliant. It's so good.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are our contenders, and our winner, of course, The Expanse, of top television shows of the year. But we had several other television-based awards to give out. So
we do.
The next award, what was it? Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, for sure. So our nominees for Best TV Show in 2017 were all about either that full season that aired in 2017 or whatever partial seasons aired in 2017, like with Star Trek Discovery and Steven Universe. But we also have our nominees for Best TV Show Standalone Episode or Multi-Episode Arc. And this was actually a little difficult to come up with because a lot of these shows, Star Trek Discovery, The Handmaid's Tale, The Expanse, BoJack Horseman, the episodes are so closely linked to one another that it's hard to sort of put, put bookends around one episode, make it stand on its own and say, is this a good episode or not, without considering its context. But with that said, we chose some episodes that within the structure of a show, whether it's a half-hour show or an hour-long show, really stood out on their own, and or shows that had a couple of episodes or a few episodes that stood out as a unit, as opposed to the entire season of a show. So, with all of that in mind, we have 5 nominees for our Best TV Show Episode or Multi-Episode Arc, starting with BoJack Horseman and the episode Time's Arrow.
And then continuing that good work was The Expanse, the episode Godspeed.
Then we also have The Handmaid's Tale with its first episode, Offred.
We also had Star Trek Discovery's episode Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which is a great title. Yes. And lastly,
we have Steven Universe with the multi-episode arc that included the episodes Stuck Together, The Trial, Off Colors, and Lars's Head.
Wow. Okay. That sounds like a lot. So let's talk a little bit about this. And should we go through all of the episodes and then share our top pick? Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, so you start off, because you've got more to talk about than I do.
Yeah, so let me start off with the top of the list. I'll just go ahead and take on BoJack Horseman and the episode Time's Arrow. Now, I gave you the caveat when I was reading this category that these episodes were standalone. That is a lie. It is a straight up bald-faced fucking lie, because none of these really stand alone. But with that said, all of the work that the 4th season of BoJack Horseman does pays off in the episode Time's Arrow. So several of these episodes are either episodes where the show has been building over the course of a season or over the course of a couple of seasons to one particular moment or several particular payoffs, or just starts things off with, our pick for the pilot episode of The Handmaid's Tale. Mm-hmm. But what Time's Arrow does really well is it takes everything that's been up in the air in season 4, everything that's been kind of, hinted at or slipped in, and puts it all together. Mm-hmm. And does so in the way that BoJack Horseman has of being both really compelling and also really heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. You think they're funny talking animals and everything's going to be sort of funny, but, oh man, it is not. It is very much not. So I will say, only, again, without giving spoilers, because I can't tell you anything more that happens in this episode without totally screwing up your viewing of the 4th season if you haven't seen it yet, but the way in which it goes about presenting all of those things not only is phenomenal for the show, but also is one of the cleverest uses of flashback, of time jump, that I've ever seen in a show. So
well, that's a pretty high recommendation.
Great payoff.
Because a lot of shows that we're going to talk about today use time jumps.
Yes, they do.
So, yeah. Impressive. I want to make sure that we do talk about The Expanse episode Godspeed. Now, The Expanse won our best show of the year, so it stands to reason that there would be some pretty strong episodes in this season. And I would like to particularly call out not just Godspeed, which was a very strong episode, but the episode which came after it, so for those of you who haven't watched the show, I don't want to spoil too many things, but Godspeed includes the first big reveal of the season. And it has to do with the MacGuffin. And we've talked about MacGuffins before, but at this point, the MacGuffin becomes a very important actor in the course of the series. And the following episode visually brings home another great scene involving that MacGuffin. So I highly recommend watching not just Godspeed. Well, of course, I advocate watching the whole show, but Godspeed and Home, which are the 4th and 5th episodes in the season, are really, really strong, as is the final episode of the season, Caliban's War, which again includes some, frankly, phenomenal visuals that I did not expect to see in a mainstream science fiction television show. So I highly recommend those episodes. Godspeed won out because it does have that narrative power. This very tightly plotted episode with fantastic acting, great visuals, and that enormous reveal. So everything comes together in Godspeed in a way that's really, really pleasing, both to the eye and to the mind. And I think it does a lot of the important work emotionally of the show as well. So highly recommend it. It also farewells, in part, a very important character, that episode and the one that follows. So take a look at the Expanse episode, Godspeed, for sure. Tony, what other episodes do you think we need to talk about today?
Well, let me go right to the bulk of episodes I picked for Steven Universe. And bear in mind that I pointed out that there are 4 episodes you really have to consider as part of this particular multi-episode arc. But episodes in Steven Universe are between 11 and 12 minutes long, so these 4 episodes probably aren't even as long as some of the hour-long episodes on this list. So, just for context. But the reason why I picked this particular arc as the best of Steven Universe in 2017 is that it's pretty much doing everything I said regarding Steven Universe's nominee for Best TV Show. It's celebrating what Steven Universe has come to represent, what Steven Universe has come to showcase to its audience, both young and old, very well. But at the same time, it's also pushing things forward. We get to see new characters, such as in the trial, a character voiced by Amy Sedaris, which is just brilliant because Amy Sedaris is brilliant. We get to experience a whole nother group of outcasts of the Gems, which are one of the major players in Steven Universe's universe. We get to see how Steven himself deals with a friend's death. And I apparently am going way back on my no spoilers thing, but I feel like that's important to note here, in part because it happens and it hits you without warning, the same way that if you haven't seen it, I just did. And how Steven deals with that is something that the show has never dealt with before, and frankly doesn't get dealt with a lot still on children's television.
Right.
So all these episodes considered, I think that they make a really strong case for being some of the best television on the air in 2017, and certainly some of the best that Steven Universe has produced. I also, before we get to our top pick, I want to talk about Star Trek Discovery again.
Okay.
And
I won't tell you not to, because obviously it sounds great.
Right. And hopefully this episode, I will also be a little spoilery, but I won't give away too much. Because Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad actually, while it still furthers the ongoing story of the first season, it also kind of reels us back in and allows us to do a little Star Trekking in the universe. We get to see how the crew does with a space whale. We get to see how the crew lets their hair down. We get to see how the crew, or particular characters that we're following in the crew, deals with some very problematic time jumps and then learns how to deal with them. One of the criticisms that I think is fairly unfounded, and again, we'll talk more about this in the future, that's been leveled towards Star Trek Discovery is that it's just not Star Trek enough, or it doesn't feel like Star Trek. And I take issue with that particular critique because it is Star Trek. It's right there in the name. It is part of the Star Trek universe. The Star Trek universe is capacious enough to be able to, have in it both whatever the folks who are leveling that critique think of as the best of Star Trek. At the same time, it contains, some of what I would identify as the worst of Star Trek, some of the worst episodes, some of the less successful movies. It's all in there. It's all Star Trek. The definition of what Star Trek is will stretch and change based on anything and everything new coming out. But with all of that said, it's so nice to see an episode like Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which not only is part of that ongoing story and discovery, but gets us back to seeing the characters, out in space, exploring, even as a war is going on. So the best of the new and the best of the old, I think, is what this episode has to give to us.
Yes, I can't wait to see it. And unfortunately, I can't really talk about it because I haven't seen it. So I'm just going to uncomfortably segue to our winner for this particular category.
Yes.
Which, if you, by process of deduction, already figured out, is The Handmaid's Tale episode Offred, which is the first episode in the series, and as such carried an enormous burden, which was to make the world the possibly outlandish, possibly realistic dystopia of The Handmaid's Tale not just believable, but palatable enough that you want to keep coming back. That is a hard thing to do when you're talking about evils. Can I use that word? Evils as evil as
absolutely.
The ones displayed in this show. Like there's no easy way to make people love the thing that you're also trying to make them hate. But this show does a fantastic job of drawing you in through incredible character development. And that character development begins hardcore with this first episode. And the first episode does some serious heavy lifting and manages to tick all the right boxes cinematically, acting, casting, writing, in order to make you invested in the future of these characters. Yes. And I bought it from the first moment on screen, which, for those of you guys who have read the books, you'll probably know exactly what scene this is, but it's the scene in which three characters are separated from each other, and the stakes are so high, and they're so believable, and there's a very particular filming style where the camera never cuts away from the lead character's face throughout this first episode, and it's really, really well done. Not just is it well done, but it's heart-wrenching and all the good things that it needs to be, but also really, really off-putting and heartbreaking. And you conclude the episode with the lead character doing something or participating in a group activity that's really reprehensible.
Yeah.
And then the episode cuts to Leslie Gore's song, You Don't Own Me, which was just the absolute perfect, transition choice. It forces you to question everything that you've seen in that episode. And one of the defining characteristics of this show is the use of that final credits song to force you to reinterpret everything that you've seen in the episode that it preceded it. So I don't know. I mean, it kind of maybe feels gimmicky after 4 episodes, but that first episode, damn, it's so good and it's so on point. Yeah. So I highly recommend that you check out that first episode. Tony, did you have anything to say about this, our category winner?
I want to echo everything you said. The only thing I would add to that is that expectations were both so high and so low that it was, the bar was set impossibly high, and at the same time, no one had any expectations. Hulu producing a high concept dramatic series with a great cast based on this beloved Margaret Atwood novel that's kind of science fiction but also kind of not, because Margaret Atwood doesn't really write science fiction. It had so many ways that it could have fallen flat. It had so many ways that it could have succeeded. How do you do an adaptation like that, especially given that there had been an adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale already that,
kind of sucked.
Yeah. And just to see it delivered in this way that was terrifying, and I just like it's so good that it's hard to find words to describe how good it is.
Yeah,
and
it was also so timely.
Yes, and that the fact that I have trouble finding words to describe how just delightful the experience was of being forced through all these emotions, being asked by the show to do all of these things, to do all this emotional work with these characters, in response to these characters, in response to what I was seeing on screen. Powerful is really, I think, the key word that I would use to describe our winner in this category.
All right. And before we move on, just a side note, many of these television shows have already been renewed for their next seasons.
Yes.
And the trailers are out for at least several of them, including The Handmaid's Tale. So we recommend you check that out. I know filming is either ongoing or just closed for The Expanse. Star Trek Discovery is obviously finishing out its first season.
Yes.
There's a lot to look forward to in 2018 in the continuation of these series that we've talked about in the last two categories. So check it out. And our next category is also pretty exciting because some of our picks are pretty weird.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
We're going to talk about best movies next.
Yeah.
So Tony, do you want to start off the list?
Absolutely.
Nominees?
So we have 6 nominees for our favorite movies of 2017, starting with Colossal.
Followed by Wonder Woman.
And then we have The Shape of Water.
Star Wars The Last Jedi.
Your Name.
And lastly, Okja.
Yeah. So, a really great company of 6 movies, not 6 movies that you would probably put together in any other context.
Right? They're so weird. I mean, you've got some mainstream picks in there, you've got some superhero, you've got some space opera, you've got kind of indie, you've got movies that were released late in the year, early in the year, middle of the year, and then Okja just defies everything. So there's just a lot of weirdness on this list, and actually this was a category in which we were not able to reconcile our differences. I'm afraid that we are officially divorced when it comes to this particular category. So we have 2 winners. Should we declare them at the outset and then talk about all of them? Okay.
Yeah, let's start with them. So why don't you start with one, and then I'll talk a little bit about it, and I'll follow with the other.
Sure, sounds great. Okay, so thank you for letting me lead, because I personally think that my top pick should be the top pick, but I also haven't seen the other top pick, so I can't really say that for sure. My top pick for 2017 in movies was the movie Colossal. This is a movie about like the suburban forgettableness of mundane life that is suddenly interrupted by like the sublime and the surreal. It is the most unexpected. Well, I can't even say that. It was one of the most unexpected, pleasant surprises when it comes to cinema in 2017. I resisted seeing it for a long time because I have a love-hate relationship with Anne Hathaway. So that was, if that is your defining feature of a movie, that it stars Anne Hathaway, then I'm either going to absolutely love it, as I did Colossal, or I'm going to absolutely hate it. So, Colossal, I don't know how else to describe it apart from suburban person with substance abuse issues ends up magically, science fictionally controlling a, what do you call them? A colossi, I guess.
Like a kaiju?
Kind of like a kaiju, but yeah, maybe.
Not exactly.
it definitely jives with kaiju cinema in that the kaiju or colossi, if you want to call it that she is magically, science fictionally involved with is in, I believe it's Seoul, Korea. And so there's definitely a lot of like monster smashing and big city monster smashing that relies on kaiju tropes. And that becomes cinematic shorthand for what's happening over there. We don't have to pay too much attention to it. We just see it stomping around doing its thing, and we like understand what's going on. The real pleasure of watching this movie is watching Anne Hathaway's character and the other characters work out their childhood sort of traumas or hang-ups that have followed them through into adulthood in really satisfying and unexpected ways. And it involves playing around in a schoolyard playground or thing. It's so weird. Like, every component of this does not make sense, but it's also great. So that is my top pick for the year. What was yours?
Well, actually, before I get to mine, I want to throw my self behind Colossal as well, because it was actually the first movie on our list that I saw in 2017, and it was the first one that I knew had to be on the list, because you see it, and when I saw trailers for this back at the beginning of the year, maybe even in 2016, I don't remember, but it looked kind of like it would be funny, maybe a little bit like an absurdist dark comedy or black comedy. And I have a love-love relationship with Anne Hathaway. Anything that she's in, I will see and probably like to some degree, because I like her a lot. When I saw it, it actually, as long as we're talking about all our on-screen picks for this year, it reminded me a lot more of BoJack Horseman, because it tackles some really, really difficult things to talk about through this almost surrealistic, absurdist lens. And, really helps to showcase what the power of speculative fiction can be. Because you could tell these kinds of stories. You could tell the BoJack Horseman story without animal people. You could tell the story in Colossal without the huge monsters. But at the same time, you couldn't. Because that wouldn't be the same story anymore. Because sometimes, going all the way back to something like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or Kafka's The Metamorphosis, sometimes someone just kind of has to turn into a bug to get through it. And so...
That is an unexpected parallel, but that seems really fitting for this movie that was so full of unexpected surprises.
Agreed. So definitely a worthy pick for top movie of the year, Colossal. The tie that we have, the movie that I have seen and I argued really strenuously for, is The Shape of Water. And now that we've had the Oscar nominees announced, as of the time of recording, I think they came out a day ago, 2 days ago, very, very recently. And The Shape of Water has gotten something like 67 nominations in different categories. Like, I think it's been nominated for, like, Best Foreign Language Short Film or something somehow.
Yeah, it's at least 5.
I did not expect it to be as universally praised, or at least as nominated as it has been in the mainstream awards, because it's very much like a speculative fairy tale. And I know, again, because it's by Guillermo del Toro, there have been a lot of comparisons to Pan's Labyrinth, even to, like, his work on Hellboy. If you like those movies, if you like his other works, you will certainly like this. I have seen the opinion expressed, and I have been going back and forth on it myself, as to whether or not The Shape of Water is a superior movie to Pan's Labyrinth. And that's an interesting question, because some days I think it is, and some days I think it isn't. They're certainly very different movies, but Pan's Labyrinth was not the kind of universally acclaimed, award-nominated movie that The Shape of Water is. And I don't know quite what to do with that, because if Pan's Labyrinth is a stronger movie, like, what does it mean for where we are now? Is, our genre movies, if The Shape of Water is a genre movie, getting more respect? Is it, again, just kind of like an allegorical tale?
Is that really
a nice fairy tale?
Though? Is it really true that it received less attention? Because I think, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for Pan's Labyrinth, and it won 3 Academy Awards and was nominated for 3 more, which actually puts it roughly neck and neck with what The Shape of Water is pulling right now.
Right. And I agree with that mostly, but And again, it could just be a function of, how the Academy Awards have changed in the interim, but like The Shape of Water getting nominated for Best Picture, all of its actors getting nominated in the acting categories, as well as directing, as well as cinematography and writing and all these things. Like, I think that I am very, very pleased with The Shape of Water. I think it's definitely, deserving its spot on both our list of the best movies of 2017 and the Academy of Motion Pictures list of best movies of 2017. But as I've said in several other podcasts from 2017, there's a part of me that is seeing, these nominations for this movie and the way that The Shape of Water was received as being a really positive predictor of what may be to come in terms of speculative fiction, both on screen and off. So my fingers are crossed. It was a great standalone movie, but also I'm having some hopes based on how it's been doing so far.
Yeah, I'm really excited that it's receiving recognition, even though I haven't seen it. Obviously, I love the casting. I am familiar with many of the actors who are involved with the making of that project. I have a tenuous love relationship with Guillermo del Toro in that I really enjoyed Pan's Labyrinth, and I think he does important work. But Pacific Rim remains a problem for me in a lot of ways, which that could be a whole other podcast about my feelings about Pacific Rim because they are complicated. But I really appreciate that the film that's making such waves, it also centers the story of a young woman and her coming of age and her sexual exploration.
Yes.
And not just a young woman, but a young woman with what you might, I suppose you would call it a speech impediment. So she has resonance with the rising conversation about ableism in science fiction and fantasy and other genres as well. That is really, really pleasing to see brought to the big screen. I think that that's a conversation worth returning to at some point. As we discuss other authors who are #own voices involved in the ableism conversation in science fiction and fantasy. So, Tony, what were some, or at least what was one other movie that you think we absolutely must talk about?
Well, I think we really ought to talk about all of our nominees, but maybe a little more briefly. The only movie that I saw in theaters multiple times in 2017 was Wonder Woman. And I know we both have things to say about Wonder Woman. So I'll start us off just by saying that I am not particularly a fan of superhero movies. I'm not a big superhero comics reader. I never have been. Like, I didn't grow up with them. I didn't watch any of the TV shows. I haven't seen a whole lot of previous movies, but I wanted to see Wonder Woman not only once, but multiple times once I saw it, because it is such a strong movie. It is so, again, powerful, I think is the right word, because we get to see not only a movie about a woman that is really, really well made, but a movie made by a woman about a woman. And that seems, really one of the most important things that Wonder Woman does. And obviously it's, you can't separate the movie from its cultural impact, from everything that happened around Wonder Woman. For the most part, all the good things that happened around Wonder Woman. And I think it's fair to say that obviously, we're only a few months out from it having been released, but it's changed the conversation. And that, like The Shape of Water, like my hopes for the future, I think that Wonder Woman is not only was a really compelling standalone movie, but for, contributing to what happens in the future, it absolutely deserves recognition.
Agreed. I also have to say that the moment when she climbs out of the trenches and faces, I think it's when she faces no man's land. Yeah. And there's the bullets bearing down on her. It's a very, very science fictional moment. It's a very empowering moment. And it's also an emotionally sensitive moment. I really appreciated that in the midst of these, enormous, satisfying action sequences, that there was time to slow down and make sure that the audience felt something, which I really appreciated because we don't often get that from our superhero films, especially the superhero films of 2017. A lot of them struggled to deliver on the emotional side of things. So, yeah, major kudos to everyone involved in the Wonder Woman project, especially Patty Jenkins, the director. Her vision was really exceptional. I would also like to make sure that we throw a lot of love at the movie Okja this year. Okja is a multilingual film, primarily foreign language, and it had been available on Netflix for quite a while before I actually sat down and watched it, and it came highly recommended by one of our favorite science fictional authors, Nnedi Okorafor, on her Twitter account. So I knew, based on what I'd seen out there in the ether, that I needed to watch it, that it would probably be enjoyable. But I really don't like pigs. Like, that is a thing. It's a little quirk of mine. Pigs and monkeys I really struggle with. And I think, especially because this film deals with the ethics of food production and consumption, I had a lot of neuroses I had to get over before I could actually watch it. And what it turns out to be is this incredibly powerful, moving, sweet, humane film about our food production methods and advertising and marketing and the corporate machine which we've built around food, and what happens when that food has a personality and a backstory and a sense of loyalty to people. And it's just it's so heart-wrenching. It clearly had a message. It was it could theoretically have been a really preachy movie, but it somehow manages to overcome that. And it's perhaps the most heartfelt movie on this list that I've seen, at least. I loved Colossal. I thought it had a lot to offer. I also think that Okja makes a great parallel to Colossal. They're tackling very different but very adult concepts, very sophisticated sort of deconstructions of how we tick, why we tick, the ways in which we interact with other people and other creatures in our environments in a really, really interesting way. So I highly recommend checking out Okja on Netflix. It is a film that takes a while to get going, but once it gets going, it really, really moves and has legs. So I recommend that as one of my top picks for the year, for sure. What's another top pick for you?
Well, speaking of foreign language films, one of my top picks of this year was the anime Your Name. And I know it also got some recognition. I don't think so much in the U.S., although I could be wrong about that. But I think it won several awards in Japan. But it is... it's hard to talk about why it's such a good movie without giving everything away, because it's really tightly interwoven. The plot is not necessarily complicated, but it is complex. But more importantly, you can't really talk about the characters without, going beyond the first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, just telling you kind of who they are, without telling you who they become. So I actually went into this movie pretty blind. I knew that it had won some awards. I knew that it was a really good anime, and that's about it. So I don't know that I can recommend it on a lot more than that, because so much of the magic of this movie is experiencing it for the first time, experiencing what the characters go through, what they learn as they learn it for that first time. And to some degree that's true of every particular work, but the twists in this movie, the reveals in this movie, the character discoveries in this movie, the character arcs in this movie really work with the viewer's ignorance of what they are going in and how things work going in. So that's all I'm going to say about Your Name. Check it out. I believe it's on Netflix as well. If not, I sure watched it somewhere online. So presumably one of those
Right.
services.
And I would also note that it premiered in 2016, late 2016, but it was released, it had widespread release in the US in 2017.
Yes.
And it is very, very highly rated. It has almost perfect reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and when has that happened? So
Right.
it's doing very well with the critics. Hopefully we'll see some sort of mention with the Academy Awards. I haven't looked at the list in detail yet of nominees, but I'm assuming
I didn't either.
it'll at least rate a mention, and that's pretty incredible. I mean, just the fact that it's enjoying such popular acclaim in the US and critical acclaim is amazing, because I believe that the director ran out of money before he was actually truly finished with making the film. So it's a great testament to the power of creativity and the original vision of the creators, for sure.
Yes.
The last film, which we absolutely cannot move on without mentioning, is Star Wars: The Last Jedi. And this was a movie which generated a lot of controversy this last year, in part because it had the audacity to discuss and display nuanced conversations about the nature of good and evil. And when has that ever happened in Star Wars? I mean, it was a special film in a lot of ways. Yes, it was special because it was the last film completed by Carrie Fisher. And so it is our farewell to General Organa, and I recognize that that's going to play in a little bit to my emotional response to the film, maybe just a little smidge. But it also stood on its own merits as a film. It had a very interesting plot structure. It was a lot longer than the average Star Wars film. It fit a lot more in there. Despite the fact that it had its messy moments, I feel like it was a very satisfying space opera, in addition to being an ambitious one, in that it did go after these sophisticated conversations about good and evil, how we engage with our enemies. Are they enemies or are they our friends? You know, all of these things were very interesting. And visually it was stunning. It was a gorgeous film. It featured a lot of new worlds that we hadn't seen before, new technologies, new creatures, and all of it was just really, really well done. And all of the things that made it controversial happened to be things that strengthened its appeal to me. A person who really needed the ending scene that it gave us. It left me in tears. I was sobbing at that end because Rian Johnson understands the reasons why we fell in love with Star Wars in the first place. It was such a siren call to those of us who discovered Star Wars when we were young and needed it. So I'm going to get emotional talking about that if I talk about it anymore. Did you have any thoughts about The Last Jedi that you needed to get off your chest?
Only that I was surprised. I was happy. I thought it was just such a fantastic send-off for Carrie Fisher. And makes me so sad that we aren't going to see her again on screen, in that role in particular. And also that we don't have her around anymore. But one of the things that this movie did that I absolutely did not expect from a Star Wars movie, because I agree with everything you said as well, but I have no idea what to expect next. And that's not something that has happened before. Like, I am not a huge Star Wars fan, but, you know, I was aware of the internet, trying to figure out, going into this movie, who Rey's parents were and who the big bad guy was. What's his name? Snoke. Who Snoke was. And, you know, these sorts of things. And to respond to those questions with, not only do they not really matter, but they don't matter in important ways to the characters themselves. And, you know, I imagine we're going to do a Star Wars podcast at some point. You know, it was just such a fascinating way to go about it, as well as to, like, you know, take a character that everyone really loved in the introduction of the new trilogy, Poe, and sort of, you know, problematize him, to introduce new characters, to bend old characters in new ways, especially to...
Oh, man. Rose was such a good character.
Oh, she was. Yeah, I loved her. But, you know, to do the things that this movie did with both Luke and Leia, amazing. Things that I didn't know that I wanted until the movie presented them to me, and then I was like, oh, this is what a Star Wars movie can be.
Yes.
And for that reason, again, kind of like Star Trek Discovery on our best of TV list, like there was always the possibility of Star Wars being on the best movies of 2017 list. Like it was either going to be here because it broke new ground, or it was going to be nowhere near this because it, you know, just fell flat in whatever ways. And again, I'm really happy to say that it's on this list because it deserves its place and because Star Wars broke Star Wars.
Yeah.
And again, just a final footnote here before we move on to our next category. Again, a lot of the criticism that was being leveled at The Last Jedi is that it wasn't Star Wars enough, or it took Star Wars in a different direction, or something like that. And I have the same response to that I have to that critique of Star Trek Discovery. It has Star Wars right in the title. It's right there. It's part of the Star Wars universe. If you can't accept that, if the only critique you level at that movie, or if not the only critique, but if the important critique that you level at the movie is that it doesn't seem Star Wars enough, then it's maybe you're thinking about what Star Wars is
that's
too narrow, more problematic than the movie itself.
Yeah, so. I happen to agree with that. As my final thought on Star Wars, The Last Jedi, it managed to take the best elements of all of the series and standalones that have gone before. I mean, I realize at this point there's really only been one standalone, which is Rogue One, but Rogue One, it was another film, Star Wars movie, that subverted expectations and did different things, and I think really enriched our understanding of the Star Wars universe. And it also draws upon some of the elements from the prequel series that were really, really great. And those might be to some people few and far between. But there were some things about the prequel series which were pretty exciting and interesting. And it also, of course, pays homage and expands upon and enriches our understanding of the characters from the original series. And I just really appreciated that it didn't get bogged down by homage, and it didn't get bogged down by like doing... being enslaved to this like mythology of these characters we've created in our heads since the original series, but it managed to do fresh and interesting and unexpected things with those characters, and also be pretty grim, like unrelentingly grim the whole way through, and yet also very, very hopeful movie. So a very, very interesting pick, and definitely deserving of a spot on our best of 2017 list. So. Tony. So,
we've arrived here at our final on-screen award for the 2017 Imaginary Awards. And this one, it's not TV, it's not movies, it's actually both. It is our award for the best on-screen moment. So whether that's, a scene that's a couple of seconds, or I should say a moment that's a couple of seconds, or an entire scene that, is several minutes with dialogue back and forth and a lot of things that go on. These were our top picks for things that happened on screen in science fiction and fantasy.
There's a very slight spoiler warning to this particular category in that we are literally describing things that happen, but we are not going to provide context, so you will not understand why these moments are significant unless you actually watch the episode or movie in which they are embedded. So if you have your interest piqued by these moments and have not seen the original text itself, go and watch that original text, and suddenly our award will make perfect sense. So, Tony, do you want to start us off by mentioning the first moment?
Absolutely. So this is from Colossal, one of our two favorite movies of 2017. And the moment is the one in which Gloria contemplates killing Oscar.
Yeah, it's a good moment. And then from the Expanse episode Godspeed, the moment when the moon... Is it a moon?
The moon. A moon. A moon.
A satellite.
An asteroid.
An asteroid.
A heavenly body.
A heavenly body moves.
Yes. Then we have The Shape of Water, our other top pick for the best movie of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And this moment is when the main character, played by Sally Hawkins, dances with the amphibian man.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. Our next moment on the list is from the Stranger Things episode, The Spy, which consists of hairstyling tips from Steve, the babysitter.
Then we have another Stranger Things scene in here. This is actually an entire scene from the episode Will the Wise. And that scene is the one at which Joyce at the kitchen table asks Will to stop lying, and Will tells Joyce everything.
Mm-hmm. Then another moment on our list is from the movie Wonder Woman, and it is, we've already mentioned, Wonder Woman entering no man's land.
Yes. And then our final nominee before we reveal our top pick for Moment on Screen in 2017 comes from the movie Your Name, and it is the character's first journey to the shrine.
That sounds very interesting. I look forward to seeing it. Okay, and
drum roll.
Our winner for top moment on screen is what?
In Star Wars The Last Jedi, Leia re-entering the ship.
Using the Force.
Using the Force. And this is going to be, I can tell you right now, this is going to be a controversial pick. Star Wars was already a controversial movie. This moment in particular drew criticism for reasons I honestly did not even read a whole lot about it, except that I saw this movie... I saw this scene from the movie being used as an example of what's not right about the movie or things that really bothered people about it. When I saw this in theaters, I went in without knowing any spoilers, without having read any reviews. This scene filled me with so much glee. Because I knew that Carrie Fisher was not coming back, and I assumed that, they would give her a send-off appropriate to Leia's role in the franchise. I was a little disappointed with where things were heading, and then this happened.
I know.
And I was like, I was getting my life. Like, I can't even tell you. It was so satisfying.
So satisfying. And I love it not just because I'm a feminist, and it was really great to see it confirmed on screen in canon that Leia has just as much power in the Force as her brother, but that she uses it differently, and that it looks so unique to her character.
Yeah.
I also just loved it because it was a great cinematic move. It subverted its own, interior expectations of the scene. You thought that the movie was headed one direction, then this scene happens. And then within the scene, the first moment of the scene happens, and then it subverts itself. And it's just, it was everything I needed from the movie to be super cathartic. I think that was the moment when I started crying in this movie, and then I cried all the way through until the final credits. So, I mean, yes, I'm an emotional mess anyway, but that was a really, really great moment, and it encapsulated everything that we loved about that movie, controversy and all.
Yes.
So that was our top pick. There you have it. That was our final on-screen, whether small or large, award for the 2017 year. And we have one more category, which is very, very close to our hearts, that we wanted to use to close out our awards. And it brings us back to books. But not to categories that we've seen before in other awards systems. This is a category we think rather unique to us, in that we are celebrating the best cover art in science fiction and fantasy. And it's not just because we think books are pretty and we want to talk about how pretty they are. It's also because we think the work of the illustrators and designers who put these covers together is criminally under-recognized.
Yes.
And as we all know, we do judge a book by its cover. The cover is a vital component of why we pick up and retain a book and
Yep.
carry it with us all the way to the checkout line. This is the magical category, which neither one of us can remember why or how it started, but we do remember why it's important to us now.
Yes,
So,
we do know that. Yes.
Do you want to mention our nominees? There were quite a few.
Yes, there. So
Sure.
I will start us off.
Okay.
So these are our 2017 nominees for Best Novel or Novella Cover Art. I will note before we start listing the nominees that these are actually surprisingly difficult to find in some circumstances. I thought that because the cover art is part of the book, that it needed to be identified, the artist needed to be identified, the designer needed to be identified on the copyright page, or at least somewhere within the book, and learned that that is not always true. Mm-hmm. So these are our best guesses in some cases. They are the names that we found online. They're the names that we have hunted for when we've liked a particular piece of cover art. They are not necessarily all correct, so if you know any of these books' cover artists, or if you are in fact one of these books' cover artists, please let us know. We also have them all listed on our website as with all of the awards, but we're also going to try and link to the portfolios of some of these artists because they have a lot of great art that should be celebrated that doesn't necessarily become part of the conversation unless it's on the cover of a book like these that we're going to mention. So with all of that said, we're going to start off with The Power by Naomi Alderman with illustrations by Marsh Davies.
Yes. Followed by Landscape with Invisible Hand by M.T. Anderson, with art by Matt Roser.
Then we have Star's End by Cassandra Rose Clark, with a cover illustration by Darren Hopes.
Then we have Passing Strange by Ellen Klages, with cover art by Gregory Manchess and cover design by Christine Fultzer.
Then Luna Wolf Moon by Ian MacDonald, with art by Victor Mosquera.
Autonomous by Annalie Newitz, with art by Will Staley.
Akata Warrior by Nydia Corafor, with cover art by Greg Ruth.
Another Nydia Corafor comes next with Binti Home, and its cover art by Dave Palumbo, and its cover design by Christine Fultzer.
Then we have Beasts Made of Night by Tochi Onyebuchi, with interior design by Eric Ford, and cover art we just couldn't find who did the cover art for this book. It might be Eric Ford because he did the interior design, but cover artist, if you know that person, if you are that person, please make yourself known.
Yes, definitely. We are looking to fill out and flesh out our list. Next comes Seven Surrenders by Ada Palmer, with cover art also by Victor Mosquera.
Then we have La Belle Sauvage by Philip Pullman, with jacket art by Chris Wormel.
Born by Jeff Vandermeer, which was designed by Abby Kagan, with cover art by Rodrigo Corral.
Then we have The Genius Plague by David Walton, with a cover illustration by Eric Nyquist and cover design by Nicole Sommer-Lecht.
Artemis by Andy Weir, with a jacket design by Will Staley.
And finally, our last nominee is The Red Threads of Fortune by J.Y. Yang, with a cover illustration by Yuko Shimizu and a cover design by Christine Fultzer.
And you'll notice some names recur throughout this list, especially the cover designer Christine Fultzer, the jacket designer Will Staley, and the illustrator Victor Mosquera. One of the things that we're learning is that we're drawn to specific aesthetics, the whole package look of a book, and often the same illustrators and designers are involved in the processes, especially because many of our favorite books and novellas, specifically this last year, were released and published by Tor.com. And they happen to lean heavily on like one pool of illustrators and designers, which also happens to be very appealing. So major shout out to the publishers and other folks involved behind the scenes in bringing us these beautiful covers. We want to honor the fact that you are hopefully helping fund some of these illustrators' ongoing work, because they do some really great stuff. So, Tony, do you want to walk us through some of your picks for the year?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to end, I think, again with our top picks for the year, the ones who are going to get the Imaginary Awards. But I want to mention, first of all, Passing Strange, the novella by Ellen Klages with cover art by Gregory Manchess and cover design by Christine Foltzer. I mentioned this in our first awards podcast when I was mentioning this book as one of my favorite novellas of the year, but everything about this cover needed to work. The story in this novella is the cover.
Yeah.
It's all about this particular piece of art. If the cover wasn't what it was, the book just straight up would not work. So the fact that the cover needs to do that much work is not something that's typical of a book of science fiction and fantasy, or any book, really. And so the fact that it is beautiful as a piece of art on its own, but also really complements and supports what's going on in the text itself, just automatically makes this one of my favorites of the year. And I say automatically not because, it's not beautiful and it would have gotten the same spot if it was a shitty illustration, but just it's so important to the book that this beautiful illustration absolutely is a nominee for this award. Mm-hmm.
One of my top picks for the year was perhaps fairly predictable in that there has never yet been a cover for a Jeff Vandermeer book that I have not loved. And so I'm speaking specifically of Born. It was a beautiful cover, very eye-catching. I know that it surprised several of my coworkers at the library in that there was this disconnect between the visual beauty of the cover and then like what's described in the jacket copy. They were not expecting the plot to be so science fictional when the cover was like pastoral, sort of. And that has, again, been a defining feature of Jeff Vandermeer covers. This particular cover was designed by Abby Kagan with cover art by Rodrigo Corral. It's totally my aesthetic, but also all of his other covers have been my aesthetic. So whatever Jeff Vandermeer is doing, the artists he collects or works with or partners with, they're all phenomenal. And Born just happens to be one of the top of the cut for this year. So yeah, major kudos to those artists and to Jeff Vandermeer. So what's another one of your picks?
So one of the trends that I noticed for myself is that books that deal with visual art, I'm drawn to those covers because they're usually pretty good. My last pick was one of them, and my current pick is another one of them. It's Landscape with Invisible Hand by M.T. Anderson with art by Matt Roser. Again, this is something that the book is all about the main character's art, about him as an artist. So the cover really had to, kind of showcase that. And as opposed to Passing Strange, which is muted, looks a little almost ethereal. There's a large component of memory in the book, so that kind of makes sense with the cover. Landscape with Invisible Hand is a lot of bright, bold colors. You get kind of this, 50s-ish UFO on the cover. You get some very clearly defined, but at the same time abstract shapes, which might be kind of a neighborhood, maybe. But there's a lot going on there that is capturing the view of visual art that we get via the book. And again, this is one of those things, or one of those covers where I didn't necessarily judge the book by its cover, but I picked it up because of its cover. And that, at the end of the day, is, to me, what successful cover art is all about. Does it make me want to read the book, or do I kind of pass over it with my eye and say, I've seen that before? And I certainly had not seen Landscape with Invisible Hand before, and the pleasure I had at the cover art was only exacerbated once I actually got into the book and understood more about how the cover art complemented the text itself.
Yeah, and just like with Passing Strange, of artistic style really, really complements the plot, like what's going on with the plot. It's the perfect cover for the book, and in that sense, it's fitting as much as it is appealing on its own terms.
Yes,
and that's really, really neat. I'm going to talk about my other top picks that are not our award winner, but two of my other top picks together because I happen to have an aesthetic, and that aesthetic is Victor Mosquera's art. So he designed both the cover, or rather, I should say he did the art for both the cover of Luna Wolf Moon by Ian MacDonald and Seven Surrenders by Ada Palmer, and I have a feeling that he also did the art for, or all of the series, the Ada Palmer series. So he has a slightly impressionistic style, and he uses cool tones, and he does landscapes with science fictional elements to them. And it's a very, it's everything I love about an artwork. I would put his artworks up on my wall, and in fact, I might see about actually doing that some point in my life when I have money, because they're gorgeous. They're epic in scope, I would say, in that they feel cinematic, and they already put me in a place where I'm visualizing what's going on the page by the time I crack the covers. So they're doing very important work for setting the stage, getting me into the mental space I need to be in order to enjoy these books. And they're gorgeous on their own terms. So again, the artist is Victor Mosquera, and he did the covers for Ian MacDonald's Luna Wolf Moon and Seven Surrenders by Ada Palmer. So incredible, and he's totally my aesthetic. So do you want to talk about one of your other top picks?
Yeah, so speaking of aesthetic, I'm going to mention my last two top picks. They are The Power and Autonomous. And if you look at both of those covers, I think that there is some, you can kind of get where I'm drawing similarities between those two. They're both fairly minimal. They both feature a body part. In the case of both, it's like a hand, and in The Power you're looking at a hand palm on, and you see, I think, arteries and veins, or some kind of abstract representation of them. They look like rivers. They look like drainage patterns of some sort. In Autonomous, you have a hand turned kind of 90 degrees from that. In both cases, I am absolutely arrested by the minimalism, the stark use of color. In The Power, it's red and white. In Autonomous, it's blue and green, of what's going on there. And again, it stands out from everything else that I see on the shelf. Minimalism works for me. Those covers, in the same way I think almost that Born works, there's something that is out there to absolutely take hold of your eyes and say, put them in this book right now. Do it. Put your eyes in this book because of what's happening here. And I think I related when we were talking about our top picks for the novel of the year that I was initially turned off of Autonomous because the sort of like glib tagline of whatever it was, robots meet pirates or whatever, I was just like not at all sold on that. And yet it was the cover art that really made me think, like, what is going on here? Like, what is happening in this book that this particular art was deemed most appropriate to, catch potential readers' eyes? And that is, it certainly caught mine. It certainly, made me say, okay, I actually want to know what's between these covers now. And like you said, for your particular aesthetic, like, these are the kind of pieces of visual art that I would potentially even have on my wall. I mean, I think they mean more in context, for me at least, but, they're certainly, the artists are talented enough to have me hang them up on their wall.
Well, if I highly recommend hanging book covers up on your wall. In fact, I did that in college, briefly. It was my aesthetic back then. So now it's time for us to announce our winners for this category, which also happen to be the winners for our final category. This is the last award that we will be giving out for 2017 science fiction and fantasy. So, Tony, would you like to take us off?
Absolutely. Let's finish up with one of our absolute favorites. We are returning to our good friend Nnedi Okorafor, and we just couldn't make up our damn minds.
It's true.
Between Binti Home and Akata Warrior. Akata Warrior, the cover art was by Greg Ruth. For Binti Home, the cover art was by Dave Palumbo, with cover design by Christine Foltzer. And honestly, it came down to the two of us agreeing that we wanted one of Nettie's books to win this award. But we just couldn't decide which. Like, we were going back and forth, and I was initially arguing for Binti Home, and then I was like, well, wait, what is Binti Home doing that I wouldn't be able to argue for Akata Warrior? So we're like, fuck it. Like, Nettie's books at this point have such glorious covers that we can just give them both and say the books that inspired these covers, because in both cases, the characters who are represented on the covers are super important to the books, or the protagonists of the books. Binti Home, we have Binti. Akata Warrior, we have Sunny. And just so lovely.
They're just so damn good. They're so good. So yeah, it's a tie. And I'm really happy with this tie. Unlike our other shared victories throughout the podcast, this is one where both of us were on the same page. We'd both read both books. We'd both held both books in our hands and admired the cover art. It wasn't a disagreement that forced a tie. It was a shared sense of appreciation for the work of Greg Ruth, Dave Palumbo, and Christine Foltzer. So
yes,
we just want to make sure that we give major shout outs to these cover artists, because they've done such incredible things.
Yes.
They've brought us into a world and a mind, I should say worlds and a mind, that are really, truly exceptional, and perhaps the future of science fiction. And as with all books, it's a collaboration between all the different components. Nettie's words and her vision and her mind are incredible, but so too is the art and the execution by the cover artists and the cover designers. So, major props to all of the artists and authors and designers who made our list for this particular category. You're all great. We're going to do our darndest to make sure that you're represented on our website. And this was actually one of my favorite awards to give, because I feel like it's a category that might hopefully make a little bit of a difference in terms of getting someone recognition that they frankly deserve. So, thank you so much for sticking with us through this whole podcast. This is the second podcast in a row which has topped an hour and a half. So if you are listening at this point, you have really, really stuck with us, and we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Tony, do you have any closing thoughts about our awards, about what they can expect next year, our method and our ethic moving forward?
My goodness. Well, my personal goal for when we do the Imaginary Awards for 2018 is that I can narrow it down a little bit, because I was like, every book I read. No, that's not true. There were some real clunkers in 2017 as well, but like, just the fun that I think we both had in celebrating the best of what we read, the best of what we watched, the best of what we got to experience in science fiction and fantasy. Certainly, I've never done anything like this before. And so my hope really is that if you're listening to this, you can go out and enjoy some books, some TV shows, some movies, some novellas, whatever you choose, that you wouldn't otherwise have known about, that, you didn't know about, just straight up. And those can be really cool things. And like, part of why we're doing this at all is to help get the word out about, the authors, the creators that we really enjoy and really think should have that recognition. So certainly we'll do this again next year. Hopefully at that point we will have fewer nominees, because we're more a little bit heavier with our chop, and also I'm going to produce an award ceremony that's not 3 hours long, but whatever the Oscars do it, and the Oscars started somewhere, right?
Right. And we are letting the books be the things strutting down the red carpet. So perhaps that's why we had the cover art category. That's the fashion of this particular award ceremony. So, Tony, where can you find us or find out more information about the Imaginaries Awards?
So you can find us most readily on our website, which is imaginaries.net. You're going to find how to get to us everywhere else on the internet via our webpage, which is that. You're also going to be able to find, because it's already up, you don't even have to wait for this podcast to be out, time travel, the Imaginary Awards on our website. There's a specific page that you can reach either from the homepage or from any other page, frankly. You'll be able to see all of our, not only, I should say, all of our nominees and winners, but also all of the books, the movies, the shows, etc., that we were considering for each award. So you have the long list of nominees, and then you have an even longer list for each category of everything that could have possibly been a nominee. So take a look at all of that. They are long lists. You will hopefully find something to like there. And then, of course, you can always find us on Twitter at imaginary_pod and listen to our most recent podcasts on SoundCloud and on iTunes and all of our podcasts on YouTube. In every one of those listening locations, we are the Imaginaries.
Thank you, and have a great 2018.
Yay!